morning, Jake. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thanks for being here. Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Absolutely. I'm Jake Cohen. I am the president of the Daniels Corporation.
Who is the Daniels Corporation? Tell us a little bit more about Daniels Corporation, specifically for people who are not from Toronto or GTA region. Who is Daniels? What do you guys do? What's the size of operation? Maybe we go through that a little bit.
Absolutely. Happy to do that. So, the Daniels Corporation is a vertically integrated development and construction company. So, we have been around for 42 years. It came into existence in 1984. I've been around for 21 of those 42 years, so about half the journey. In terms of what we do at the Daniels Corporation, over the 42 years we've been in existence, we have delivered over 40,000 homes. So those homes can be in a wide variety of different typologies, predominantly the condo market and condominium development. But we have also, for probably the last 15 years, delivered a number of purpose-built rental buildings with partners, institutional capital, and also for ourselves internally. We've had long-standing relationships with a number of seniors operators. So we've delivered over 15 seniors residences over our history and continue to develop and build seniors residences. We also have a big affordable housing program that we have been building for many years. Of the 40,000 homes we've built, 7,800 of those have been in the affordable housing sector. A lot of that has been with Toronto Community Housing, which was a project that we worked on with them over a 15, 20-year period in Regent Park. But we have roots in affordable housing because our CEO, Mitchell Cohen, also my father, was the very first hire of the Daniels Corporation by John Daniels, or we called him Jack Daniels, in 1984. And Mitchell came from the co-op housing sector in Montreal and had deep roots in and desire to want to deliver affordable housing for his job and for a business. And so when Mr. Daniels was starting the Daniels Corporation, he asked around to find out who's the preeminent knowledge base developer person in the affordable housing sector. And at the time in Toronto, Mitchell was that person. So we have affordable housing deeply into our roots and have done that for many, many years, along with a number of the other typologies that I described before.
Fantastic. That's a very good intro. And yes, for those of our listeners who are not from Toronto, if you've ever been in Toronto, there's a very good chance that you've driven or walked by one of your projects, one of Daniels Corporation's projects. If you've gone to University of Toronto, you've probably seen the Daniels building there. So you guys have a definitely very pulse. We can feel your presence in the city of Toronto. So that's a good thing. So there are so many tracks that I want to kind of pursue in this conversation with you today. But something that just popped into my mind right now, and maybe it's not a bad place to start, is that you just mentioned you've been there for 50% of the length of the legacy of this corporation, right? And you're a third in command in the line of people who've been at the helm of this corporation, basically. And walk us through that journey, because I think when reading about you and doing some research, it feels like your role and your transition was very, very intentional from the 2005 that you started in the company. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It was intentional as I got into the company a little bit further and my journey kind of grew in the company. I definitely didn't have aspirations as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old when I started of where I would be today. I didn't know that I wanted to be in development and construction. My first job prior to working at the Daniels Corporation was as a tennis instructor. So, I didn't go to school necessarily for development. My first job at Daniels after teaching tennis was working on the construction sites, low-rise site labor side of things. So I worked on a number of construction sites for a number of years and got to know that side of the business, moving around a site like that, understanding what's going on a low-rise site, and getting to kind of meet the team that way. So I did that for a number of years and then transitioned a little bit into doing pre-delivery inspections of some of those low-rise sites. And I got the benefit of working with some amazingly talented supers and general supers and people at the company who were legacy people at the company that really understood how to deliver quality housing. And that's really what stuck with me, especially in those early years. About it's one thing to just slap up a building or slap up a unit or a townhouse. It's another thing to think about the quality that's being delivered, the workmanship that's being delivered, and truly using the value and the ethos that picture this was your house. This is your home that you're building. And that really stuck with me. That stuck with me through my entire journey. I mean, I'll give you one example that kind of sticks with me. It's, walking around with one of our general supers early in the morning. He would always pick me up at the same street in Mississauga at around 6 a.m. And we would kind of travel around to the different sites. And when we would go to one of the sites, we were looking at a pre-delivery inspection of one of the townhouses. So we had a bunch of green tape that we would be putting in areas if the drywall was a little out or if the light fixture was not quite right. And he pointed out to me the light switch caps. So the caps that go on light switches. And if you can picture them, they always will have a screw that's either horizontal or it's vertical. And he said, what I'm going to tell the guys who are working on the site is I want every one of those screws to either be vertical or horizontal, but they both have to be that and they have to be matching. And that's pretty particular, right? That's a level of
I
detail
love that. I love that.
that I wasn't expecting. And for the guys on site, the handyman who was doing there with his screwdriver, making sure each one was vertical. In that case, it was vertical. It was asking for a level of attention to detail that was asking for 110%. And if you ask for 110%, can you get to 100? In the end, because again, there's human error, there's time, there's, things happen. But that really stuck with me, that quality is important and paying attention is important to those details. And as I transitioned from the site labor side of things into head office, kind of after a number of years working on the sites, I got to touch a number of other parts of the business. I had the benefit of working in a group called Project Implementation. And project implementation got to touch kind of all the different elements of a development process. We got to look at design. We got to look at the pro formas. We got to talk about sales and marketing. We got to look at estimating and contracting and who are we using and what trades. And so I got to move around a number of the different groups within the company. And I think that really benefited my trajectory and the evolution of my role because I got to meet and really ingrain myself with all the senior leaders of the company at the time that had been with Mitchell and the president, he was the president at the time, and had been incredibly successful in what they have done. So I wasn't trying to do anything different. I was just simply trying to learn from them, learn from the talent that they had, learn from the experience that they had in delivering housing, thinking about quality, thinking about the end user in mind, that this is a home that people want to live in. And I just kind of ingrained myself in that and learned from every one of the different departments and department heads to gain, I would say, most importantly, a level of trust. It was really important for myself in my position to gain that trust with these various groups so that, again, I'm not there to tell them what to do or change things or do things differently. I'm there to follow and to watch and to understand. And I think I spent a good 15 years doing that across the different departments to truly understand how the company works.
That's fantastic. I very much love that example or anecdote that you said about the screws being vertical or horizontal, and it also goes to it talks a ton about the leader that you were with, because in absence of actual direction, people get lost, right? And that's regardless. It doesn't matter if it's vertical or horizontal. It's a direction. It's a point. It's a reference point. It's a benchmark that for someone to have something to aim for and gauge themselves against, which is a great thing to have in a corporation. Otherwise, you have good people just running around, not necessarily knowing what they're doing right or wrong. So I love that answer. But So you've moved through these departments and roles, and you've seen different, and I would assume Daniel's being the size that it is, which I would appreciate if you can elaborate how big the organization and chart and stuff is. You would have seen different functions, different roles. If you were to look back and say, you know what, I worked for a year or two or whatever in this particular part of the corporation, and I think this is the part that other developments or maybe even in your own company is underappreciated or the role is underestimated. Is there a team or department that you think is undervalued or people should pay more attention to?
Absolutely. No question. Such a good question. It's the customer care and service and warranty team. The customer care and service and warranty team is such an important group because they are the interface with the people who are buying the product that we are trying to sell or that we are trying to rent or that we are creating. My experience on the customer care service and warranty team was kind of second. I went from the site to then customer care service and warranty, and I got to work on a really specific job. It was called Kilgore Estates, which was at Bayview, just north of Eglinton. Beautiful residence, geared towards maybe a higher affluent group of people. 225, 226 units in 2 phases. But what I got to learn during that experience working with customer care, every one of those units at that time, we were willing to do customizations for, which was a really interesting thing. It was an interesting time in the market because, someone was willing to spend quite a bit of money to buy a nice condo sized unit. Maybe they're downsizing. Maybe this is their forever condo environment, and they want it to be very specific. And so I was extremely eager to please. I was extremely eager, coming from construction, I'd seen some things fine, but I wanted to, again, continue to make my mark. And so working on the customer care, service and warranty side of things, I got to field a lot of the phone calls from those 226 purchasers who were saying, Jake, I just moved into my unit. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. However, I would love if you could change the height of where my outlet is, as an example. Or is it possible for you to install some grab bars in this location? And again, being very ego, being relatively new, wanting to please, I was always like, absolutely, yes, no problem. We can do it. We can do it all. I would call construction, and construction team would say, they'd look at me and they'd say, Jake, the tiles are in. You want me to install a grab bar now? How are we going to do that? Other than tearing down the tiles, putting in the blocking, installing the grab bar. I said, but they want it. Mr. Jones, he desperately wants his grab bar in place. And they looked at me and again, they said, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? I said, well, we're trying to make our purchasers happy. And at the time, in a market where they were spending a lot of money and they had a certain level of expectation, we wanted to do it. What I learned being that interface with these purchasers was it is way harder from a construction standpoint to try to retrofit, to try to bolt on than build it in right up front. So it was really
Amen.
interesting. Yeah. So it was very interesting because I got to collect a bunch of information from a number of these purchasers who all wanted to do various types of things and changes that, again, once the building is built, once the bricks are up, once the windows are in, the drywall's up, it is way harder to make those kind of changes. If you're thinking about design and if you're thinking about accessibility or universal accessibility and how to live in a home, it's way easier to do that if you start to design some of these features in right up front. And this was actually a really aha moment for me because it got me thinking about what are some of the things that we can do for our buildings, for our units from an upfront design standpoint to accommodate Mr. Jones, who's looking for some of these features that would be very difficult to build or add in later on. So this got me, very excited and got me really going on a path that we started to go down kind of 10 years after that, which was building a higher universal design standard and more universal accessible homes, building in many of these features that I was hearing and collecting from the various purchasers at during that customer care, service and warranty stage. So a long-winded way of saying customer care, service and warranty are so underappreciated in that they're front-facing. They receive the information, the real-time information from how people want to live. And that getting translated to the design person, to then the architect, or then the construction team is hugely important. Closing that circle and saying, okay, we're getting feedback. Let's do some of these things next time around on the next building. Hugely important to my growth. And I would say anyone else's, if they're thinking about construction or development, is understand your purchaser, understand who is buying their home, understand who is looking to rent and what they're looking for, get into their minds of what they're trying to do. Because in the end, we're trying to deliver a product, and that product has to fit a certain person's needs. And if we're just blindly going to be doing something, it's not going to work out.
Such an interesting answer. So first of all, kudos to everyone who works in the customer care department. I have some friends who do that, and I'm always like applauding them because it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of flexibility. It takes a lot of great customer facing skills, which quite honestly I don't have. And so I'm saying like you guys are the best. So thank you for doing what you're doing. But it's also interesting because as we were talking, I was doing the math in my head, and so you guys have been around for 40, let's say 40 years for argument's sake. You've delivered 40,000 units. Rough math says you've delivered 1,000 units per year, right? And having worked on projects where we have delivered, let's say at some point in time in my career when I was involved in like more bulky projects, we were delivering 100 to 200 units a year, and that was pretty challenging, right? And so part of me wants to think for you to be able to consistently or on average deliver around 1,000 units a year, you probably have very systematized checklists and processes and procedures in place, which kind of makes me question how do you customize that, because you're also customizing some work. Like, how do you find that line? What's the balance there?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really important, and I think the market has definitely evolved from that Kilgore Estates site where 226 customized units done twice in two phases, where each unit is actually individually specified. The flooring, the tile, the backsplash, the countertop, all of them were different. We took our learnings from that and we said, okay, how do we streamline this? Because if we want to ramp the company up at that time and do more of this, we do need to have some specific things that we're going to be following. And so it was a fine balance of, okay, introducing some more specific packages that have these features and colors and levels of customization, upgrade options, keeping that more in a contained box that says you can work within these 5 options, not these 15 or endless options. And I think as the world turns and as the markets evolve, that high level of customization, there's still a place for that somewhere. But I think for Daniels, we slotted in after that project into somewhere slightly below that, which was we want to deliver lots of homes for various different people at various levels, not necessarily the highest end, at various levels of affordability and accessibility. And so streamlining the customization while still remaining relatively open to certain things that people might need and listening to those needs, that's where we learn to kind of get a little bit more flexible. I mean, having certain very specific targets in mind about how many items per pre-delivery inspection we are going to have on a unit, 3 items or less on any unit that you are walking through, big, small, medium sized. Having the construction team focus on having only 3 items that are going to be found is a benchmark. It is a very high benchmark to get because it forces the construction team, the handyman, the finishing super, the group who is in there doing that hard work at the end of the day to really pay attention and fine tune. And when you're doing that at mass scale, that's very difficult, but it comes down to training and it comes down to oversight. And again, we have systems in place where we have incredible oversight, incredible training, but then we allow the groups who are in the buildings, the people who are in the building, again, to follow that procedure and then be able to try to meet those marks. Does it happen every time? No. Every building can be a little bit different, certain nuances, certain challenges, but for the most part, hitting those benchmarks is really important to maintaining the level of standard that we're hoping to achieve.
I have to say that's a very high bar. having
Yeah.
3 PDI items on the list. And for context, for those of our listeners who have not been through this process, so what Jake is talking about is that when you buy a unit as a purchaser, toward the end, just before you take occupancy, you have a chance of walking the unit with someone you like, or like a consultant or someone, and see things that are deficient in your mind. So mark it up as part of your PDI or pre-delivery inspection form, which is part of a ecosystem that I don't want to get more into here. And that basically you're telling the builder that these are not to my satisfaction, and the ones that are valid, the builder goes there and they fix them before they turn the unit over to you. There are follow-up processes, and which again we don't want to dive too much into that, but getting it down to 3 items per unit is a very high bar. And a personal anecdote and side story, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine had bought a condo, and I made a mistake of offering and saying, listen, like, I work in construction. Do you want me to come with you for your PDI walkthrough? And we took the infamous green tape with us and went to the unit. And I regret that day very much, because I ended up picking too many items on that wall. And I thought I was doing him a service, saying, look, here's all the deficiencies I could find in this unit. But it left him feeling I bought a crap product, which probably wasn't true. So I'm never going to do that again. But yes, 3, I want to emphasize that 3 is a lot. And I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it, but how much of this bar hitting this target would you say is a result of process, and how much of it would you say is a result of having the right people and talent? Is it a 50-50 split? Is it a system that works like a McDonald's regardless of the talent, or the other way around? Or is it actually a fair question to ask you that?
No, it's totally fair. I think it's great. I think it's probably, and this is kind of my how I like to manage and understand our business and the way I've kind of watched it. And I think it's 70-30, 70 the right people, 30 the right process. I think you need process in
Interesting.
place to a certain degree to ensure that certain things are being met and we're going to follow a certain standard. No question. However, you can put any processes you want in place, but if the person across the table from you, when you are trying to teach them how it is or what our standard needs to be, don't care about that, don't share those values that we share as a company, it doesn't matter what process you have. So you need the right people, you need the right attitude, you need to know why you were there in the first place and what your role is. And whether you're the PDI green tape person or you're the quality control construction person, whatever it is, you're there for a purpose and for a reason. And that's to deliver the best quality home possible to either an owner, to an affordable housing agency that has purchased it, to a renter who's looking to rent up and be there for a year, 2 years, whatever they want, to a seniors housing provider who's going to be putting their seniors residences. It translates no matter what the typology. The quality is what matters, and the people who are there to execute that and follow that is what's the most important thing. So I got to give all the credit. None of it is mine. I give it to our VP of Customer Care and Service and Warranty, Rose Zoney, who has been in the business for a very long time. It is unbelievable what she does in terms of compassion, shared values of wanting to deliver the best for the homeowners or the renters, and then having a playbook that she can follow, that when she's thinking about hiring and bringing people on or teaching how it works, it's very easy to see what needs to be done.
Fantastic. Before we move on to the next segment of our conversation, I want to ask you a hypothetical. You've been with the company for 20 something years. You've witnessed firsthand in different positions the growth, what has worked, what has not worked in this process. And so hypothetically, if for whatever reason tomorrow morning Jake wants to start from scratch another company, which hopefully in the 20, 30, 40 years from now would be the next Daniels, right? What are some of the core principles or takeaways that you would take with you and say, you know what, I don't have all that resources, I don't have that reputation, I don't have that team with me. We're going to start from scratch. Here's ground zero. These are the 5 things we're going to stick by to make it happen, to increase our odds of getting there. What are those?
Okay. Let's see. This is a good one. Be humble. You don't know what you don't know. And I think that's a really important factor, at least from my perspective. This maybe doesn't work for everybody, but from what I can see, surround yourself with people more talented and smarter than you are. I mean, that's fundamentally for me has always been a life advice that I've been given that says like, you're not going to know everything. So why don't you surround yourself with people who are going to help you get to where you want to get to? So surround yourself with talent. I had that. I was very lucky, as I mentioned earlier, about the OGs, I'll call them, who knew how to do the business, understood how to do the business. If you're starting from scratch, you don't need to be the smartest guy in the room, or smartest gal in the room. Find the people around you to surround yourself with. So I think that's a good starting place. Understand the product of what you're trying to deliver. Truly understand it. And so you can start small. It doesn't need to be a massive 350 unit rental building or 400 unit condo tower. It can be smaller. It can be scalable. Do something where you understand the units and think about livability. Thinking from the inside out is always a really important, again, thing that we've thought about at Daniels all the way along from a design perspective. Don't let the form mess with the function. There's a worse way of saying it, but I think you get the drift. Don't let the form mess with the function. The function is really, really important. How units live is really important. There's a world of squeezing and tightening up units and having smaller everything. I mean, those work in certain circumstances, but they have to be livable. How are they livable? Are there certain things that you can do to your unit designs to make them more livable, even if they are smaller? So I think that's it. Those are a couple things. Again, like I'll go back to the service and the warranty team and having some group, having a person that's beside you that, again, shares the values of what you're trying to deliver. And I guess us as a company are maybe a little bit more unique than some of the other development construction companies that are out there. We are a for-profit company, full stop, private for-profit company. There is no doubt. However, we come from our affordable housing and co-op housing background and have roots in that space and have roots in wanting to deliver affordable housing or find ways to deliver more affordable housing in some of the programs or parts of programs that we are working on. So that comes with a certain level of value. And so making the right decisions around development, yes, the be all and the end all dollar, it can matter. Yes. And it probably should matter for many, many people. But are there other things that you can gain along the way when you are building? Is there a capacity building that you can bring along the way when you are doing a design or doing a build or having construction? Is there local community engagement that you can do along the way to not be the big bad developer who's coming in to gentrify or to knock down old and put up new and kick you out and bring in new? There are ways to get around that by being very open and honest and front facing in terms of what it is that you're trying to do and what it is you're trying to accomplish. Every step of the way, it is hugely important to deliver the bricks and mortar of a building, putting it up. That is hugely important. But there are things that you can be doing along the way, spending the right kind of money to help enhance the communities in which you're building within. That probably won't cost you more, but may just require you to think a little bit differently. I'll give you just one small example that's an easy one. And this is one that for anyone that they can take if they're building or they have a building going. And I'm not trying to gatekeep this because I think this is good for all communities. We have our roots in arts and culture as well. We love to support the arts and culture. Every one of our condos, our rentals, our seniors buildings, they come with, usually if you're filling up the lobbies or the walls of the corridors, you're filling the space with artwork. And you usually have a budget for art in those pro formas. And that budget, depending on the size of the project, that can be big. That could be $100,000 in some cases, sometimes more if it's a very large building. Most of that artwork would be bought by an interior designer, nothing wrong, at Pier 1 Exports, at IKEA, nothing wrong with IKEA. I mean, great, whatever. But the art from there, is that making a difference? Is that having an impact? And how about taking that $100,000 and doing a call to artists in the community you are building There is so much talent in this city or any of the cities that people may be building within of artists who would be dying to try to get their artwork, one, commissioned, and two, put up in a building that can stay there for perpetuity. So that's what we did. We took every one of our art budgets and we said we're going to go to local artists in the communities that we're building. We'll do a call. We'll say we have 15 spaces to put this local art into the building, and we'll put a little plaque with the person's name and recognizing what it is they're doing. And it's a very small thing. It's a very small thing that can make an actual difference to someone else's life beyond just going to IKEA and buying stock print art from the Banksy website or whatever it might be. So, I would say, the be all and end all dollar is important in development and pro formas are important in development. There are other things you can do to enhance who you are, your brand, do good while also making money and creating a business.
I love that answer. Specifically, the last part. We have had our previous guests on this podcast have basically said that what we're doing is similar to putting art pieces into a museum that lasts a long time. And these are the buildings you're building. These are parts of the city we're developing, and each of them within themselves can have characters. I know specifically one of our previous guests here, Costa, in one of his projects or his only project of that scale, he did exactly what you described, and he went to the school, local school. It's on Kingston Road and Main in Scarborough, and they in the lobby of that building, which is a 68 unit, I want to say, purpose-built rental building. They have all these arts from the local school, and it's all about green world and how green energy and helps. And it's actually an impressive scene when you walk through that lobby. It gives it character, life, and it's a pretty enjoyable thing to think about it. With this, I want to transition into some of the corporate Daniel's more landmark projects, right? You guys have worked on some very iconic projects from, I think, Regent Park, like you kind of touched on it, and you've done many others. I believe you guys have done redevelopment on Square One, if I'm not wrong, and other projects. How does one go about thinking about something like that? Like when you're thinking, developing, like it's I think in some cases it might become a multi-decade project. It's a long process. I'm sure you go through different people, through different authorities, through different different eras of industry evolution. Like there's a market's hot, market's not, and then different things. How does one approach that? How do you plan for that? How do you think about it to make sure that by the time you're done, you're not 10 years behind? You're actually, hopefully you're 10 years ahead when you're getting there. Any specific thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a real challenging one when you get involved in these long-term master planned communities. And that's a number of the things that we have been involved in over a number of the years. 20 acres, 25 acres around Square One, 30 acres in Brampton, and then 69 acres in downtown Toronto in the Regent Park revitalization. And maybe I'll just pause on that one in particular. I think the important thing around that for us had been staying consistent in terms of who we are and what we do and what we can deliver. You said it, the politics can change and shift. Leadership at various municipalities and levels of government can change and can shift, and that can change dynamics and kind of send you off into different tangents. But I think the important thing is, what is it that we want to deliver and what are we trying to deliver in a specific community? And in the case of Regent Park, it was very specific. It was bringing more rent geared to income housing and bringing a condo market along that could support the growth of both at the same time. And again, not waving a magic wand here. We didn't do anything super specific. We were part of a market condominium boom that took place while that was happening that helped benefit being able to build building after building, repeat after repeat. But I think what is important to note through all of that is, yes, you still have to be thinking about what people need. What are people looking for? What are the size of the units that they want? What are the amenity spaces that they're going to want exactly today, but also 10 years from now? And so being smart about curation of our spaces and our buildings and thinking in the long term, whether it's a condo or it's a rental, how are the operations? What are the maintenance costs going to be for some of the features in some of these buildings? And will it be a burden on a condominium 10 years from now? Or is it something that, it makes sense and it can work? I mean, we've gone away from, I'll give you one example in Regent Park, we've gone away from building pools in any of our buildings. We did that really specifically and intentionally, probably 15 years ago, in that location in particular, because there was going to be the brand new Pam McConnell Aquatic Center that was being built right in the big park. And so, okay, why would we need to duplicate our efforts and create pools, cascading, all the beautiful infinity stuff that you would do that look amazing in the renderings? Don't get me wrong, they look incredible. But actually, functionally, from a maintenance perspective, and again, I'm not down on pools. I love pools. They're amazing. But does it truly make sense? And is it needed for that building to sell that building? Or is the local amenities and what does the local space have that could help complement what it is that you're doing so you don't duplicate your efforts? So I think really being engaged in the communities in which you're building to understand what it is that those communities need. Sometimes it might be a library space. Sometimes it might be more common area workspace. Sometimes it might be more athletic space that you want to put in your building because that's lacking in that specific neighborhood. But going a little bit deeper into those spaces, those communities in which you're building, and understanding and talking to the people who live there already. That's not necessarily who you're going to be selling to or renting to, but it's going to be a general idea of who's going to be in the neighborhood that you're going to be going after. So I think really important, embed yourself, ingrain yourself in the community as best you possibly can so that you truly understand what is going to be going on in that neighborhood.
That's a very good point. I know recently I've had a couple of meetings at City of Toronto with the planning department, and they are thinking about, they're basically rethinking some of the amenities with the very similar logic to what you just explained, that if you're building a building which is very well located and very close to certain walkable nearby amenities, you may not need to have so much square footage per unit inside your building, which no one will ever use. That's the part that unfortunately we've seen over the past 10 years or so, especially with the Mindra's guidelines, that you end up building a whole bunch of amenities which rarely anyone uses because, to your point, they can step outside the building and there's a pool or there's a cafe or there's a restaurant, or in that part of the city, people don't really want to try, and they basically want to go outside and try the outside. So with that said, I want to switch gears a little bit. When I was doing the research about you and the company, a big title that kept coming up had to do with accessibility. You guys have done a lot of work about accessibility. You've made publications about accessibility, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's called Accessibility Design Standard. That is a document that you guys published. Why accessibility, and why was it so important to you guys?
Yeah, I think, I touched on this a little bit in terms of my own personal journey and how I got into this and how the company kind of got into it as well. As I mentioned before, Mitchell had co-op housing and affordable housing roots and wanted that to be his priority and the company's priority. I didn't necessarily, while I was navigating my way through the company and over the various years, know exactly what my thing was going to be. It could have been affordable housing, but I wasn't an affordable housing specialist or work in the co-op housing sector like him. What I did get to experience was what I described at the Kilgore Estate experience and then a number of other buildings, which was how do people live in their units and what do they need in their units that will make them more livable. And combine that with the fact that we worked a lot with a lot of seniors housing providers and seniors housing operators that were working with an aging population. And so combine the two. Yes, there will always be a home and a space for seniors residences and seniors accommodations. But as the population continues to age, our thinking and our thought process was there's going to continue to be a demand for more universally accessible housing that doesn't necessarily need to fall into a seniors housing bucket or specifically a seniors housing residence. Like I said, there will always be a market for that. And we love that and think that's an amazing market. And it's going to be one that will be booming over the next couple of years as that continues to happen. But there is a world where people who are aging, my parents, other people's parents in the 70 to 80 category are going to be looking to not necessarily move into a residence, but want to stay in a home or move to a condo that will make sense for them. So collecting data from a number of the buildings over the years as to the things that would be great to incorporate into a unit right up front is how I got into the accessible housing and our accessibly designed standard. Collecting information from the various buildings over the years that I did, and then a lot of my colleagues started to follow as well on their buildings. And they said, Jake, well, what if instead of 2 showers, what if we did a, no tub, just a shower, so that if somebody eventually was in a wheelchair or a walker, they could easily roll in and out of that space. What if we did that for a second bathroom? Or what if somebody wants access to their balcony? Balconies, outdoor space, hugely important. But if there's a big step to go from inside to out onto the balcony, that would be pretty prohibitive for somebody who's in a wheelchair or somebody who has a walker or using a mobility device. Very challenging. What if we designed up front a way to have a seamless transition from inside to outside? Okay, those are things that you can do. Those are things you can add to your condo units, to your rental units right up front. And it's way easier to do that before, like I said, any bricks and mortar are put up, before the drywall is up, before the windows are in. If you're designing up front and incorporating, and we collected probably 8 to 10 of these specific items that were enhanced building standards better than building code. So again, that's the thing. We're following building code, but how do we make them more livable? How do we ensure someone has the right turning radius within certain space so that they can maneuver within their bathroom, their bedroom, and their kitchen? Typically, that is there's a certain segment of units that's allowed to do that. We're saying, what if we design it up front that it can be done in more units for more and better universal accessibility? So I got into it because of the information and the research that we gleaned and we learned. And then we just said, let's put it into practice. Let's install our own standards into the buildings going forward. And we did that. And we were very proud of what we did. And we did it in a couple buildings in Regent Park, and then a couple buildings in Mississauga and in Brampton. And then I got the experience of having to bring one of my friends who's in a wheelchair. His name's Luke. And I said, Luke, you got to come look at what we've done. It's amazing. You're going to love the unit. It would be perfect for you. You'd be great. And he rolls in his wheelchair, and he does he says, Jake, I'm going to do a roll through. And he does a roll through, and as soon as he's in the lobby, he starts pointing things out. So to your point, he is an expert. You were an expert when you were doing your PDI. He is an expert in terms of accessibility. And he said right off the bat, it wasn't green sticky tape, but it was, this is what's wrong with the lobby. There's carpet transitions. There's not a great way to access the concierge reception desk because my knees bang up against them. There's not an automatic door opener in this location, even though it should be in this location. And so Luke was incredible to basically humble us and say, guys, amazing. Your units are fantastic. We love what you've done with those units. You got to figure it out from when I'm on the street to how I get through the building. And so we kind of were like, okay, we've got to fix this. And so we went from dealing with the units to dealing with the entire amenity space and the entire building and overall path of travel so that we're developing buildings that are more universally accessible. And it could be someone who's in a wheelchair, absolutely, like Luke, but it also could be someone who's with a walker or a mother or father who's got a kid on their shoulders and they're holding grocery bags and they're trying to move around and they don't want to trip on a carpet that's this thick because it looks nice and it makes sense for the interior designer. Think about the function, think about how people use the spaces, and then implement that. And you can do so in ways that won't feel institutional. They won't make it feel like a hospital. It's not going to make it feel like a retirement home. And many of them are lovely and beautiful, but you can do it in really tactful ways and smart ways. And so incorporating that level of design is what we've really gotten into and tried to promote that as much as we can across the industry. And that's why, again, we not trying to gatekeep the the standards that we've created, we're encouraging others to participate, use them, try to incorporate them into their buildings. There's a great coalition that's been started called the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition. And they're an amazing resource that hold all of the information that we've given and others have now contributed over the last 3 years of its existence to try to, again, enhance universal design standards. So that's where I would say my passion and my understanding of it came from, which kind of dovetails nicely with Mitchell and our values and our company ethos of affordability and also accessibility kind of mesh well together.
I love that answer for some reason that might not necessarily be obvious. Because what I'm listening to you for the past little while that we're talking, and we deal with on a daily basis with newer developers, with developers who are much further behind, if you may, on the maturity chart or maturity spectrum of being a developer, right? But now we're talking with you as a representative of a company who's been around for more than 2 decades, has a very successful track record of delivering less than 3 PDI per units, which is a great bar. And I love the fact that we're like for our audience as well here, that we're depicting how the maturity moves. Like I'm just thinking in my mind, please disagree with me if I'm wrong, that I'm thinking in the earlier stages of a company's evolution or growth, when you're building, you're basically more likely to try and survive. But once you get to the stages that Daniels Corporation is at, it's not about surviving, which is a great thing, but it's also about fine tuning and getting knee deep into these very important items. Like everything you just said is super important. I wish more, I guess this is my way of saying I wish more people can get to the stage of maturity as a company, as a portfolio, that they can pay more attention to what just explained. Because I as you were just talking, I'm thinking, like even in our buildings that we've done, and we've tried to do a whole bunch of accessible best practices. I'm sure there are issues. I'm sure there are issues that we haven't looked at it as closely. So that's a great thing. And I think that's also something for people who are starting out and trying to put together a development portfolio and building a company to aim for. That at some point in your journey, I would like to call it, that you get to a point that it's not just about more and bigger and more portfolio. It's also about fine tuning on more important stuff and getting to a better quality. It's interesting how much of our conversation has revolved around customer feedback and client care. So I just wanted to point it out especially for our audience who have been listening to our previous podcast as well. With that said, aside from accessibility, are there any other trends or movements in the industry that you're seeing that you say, you know what, this is an interesting movement. I wonder where it's going to go in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm very excited for it. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're really interested in and have been for many years, but now even more so because of time is of the essence. Low-rise stick-built housing, a low-rise townhouse development and housing, and looking for sites of a certain size and scale. And I think likely gone are the days of the 70-story monster towers. And again, it had its time and it had its place. And maybe it comes back. But I just think there's a reality to risk tolerances and risk thresholds. And there's a magic to a big developer or even a smaller developer or mid-size to be able to say, we're tying up a piece of land. Government bodies are allowing us to move a little bit quicker through that development approval process. That's a good thing. That would be a win, cutting some of the red tape. We can design it and start construction quickly. And guess what? We can get through a construction build quickly as well. And I think it's really important. And we are focusing on pieces of land that would be like that. Pieces of land that we could either deliver for ourselves, for purpose-built rental townhouse communities, or we're building for affordable townhouse communities for various regions that may need that. But there's opportunities out there to be able to build stick-built housing, townhouse housing, because there's a market for family housing. People talk about how do you build family housing? There's spaces, there's pockets for that. It may not be in directly downtown Toronto, that's for sure, but on the outskirts, in Durham, in Peel, in those regions in particular, but I'm talking Brampton, I'm talking Mississauga, I'm talking Erin Mills, I'm talking Ajax and Oshawa, I'm talking about some of these other places around the GTA that are absolutely have opportunities that are right for that type of development, because size and scale can matter, and it doesn't always have to be bigger and more density and grander. It could actually be smaller, might be a little bit better and make a lot more sense from a return perspective.
That's an interesting trend that you're seeing, and I'm happy that you're talking about it and you think about it, because you're right. We need more family oriented and especially ground oriented types of developments that works well for families. I want to try and start wrapping this up. It's been very fun. If you were to talk to Jake or someone in Jake's position 20 years ago, starting out in a company, potentially a large company, and you want to expedite or fast track their learning curve, what are some advices you would give to that 20 something year old or 20-year-old who is just starting out, and say, you know what, these are the things that you need to really learn that would help you fast track your career?
Okay, so that's really interesting because my answer is probably going to be counter to what the question is, which is patience. Patience. Development requires patience. And I actually think there's no shortcuts in development and construction. I think you can't fast track. You can learn and you can build and use the learnings and the building blocks as a way to grow your knowledge base, as a way to grow your understanding of the business. But what served me the best was simply showing up every single day in and day out, and putting in the time and understanding and learning what we did well and what we didn't do well. And again, be humbled by the fact that you're not going to know everything and you're going to make mistakes. And hopefully you have smarter people around you that help mitigate those mistakes and make them, manageable. But it's okay to do that. It's okay to try and push things. I think that's an important thing. Developers, construction, in its nature, is about risk mitigation, but there are ways you can manage that risk in certain controlled ways. And if you're just starting out, think about how you can do that. And the way you can do that is, again, having people around you that have done it and been there before, and take some of that feedback and take some of that advice. But also you're okay to be creative and keep pushing. So I mean, there's no shortcuts. That's the unfortunate part to the answer. I really don't think
There's
there's
no shortcuts.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like the amount of experience you get by going through a full cycle project, regardless of the scale. Even if you're doing a house, you're doing a 3-story building, doing a 30-story building, a full cycle of that project, the amount of learning that it will bring for someone, it's in my mind incomparable to anything you can get from books, TVs, and TV shows, or like definitely not from HGTV or something like that. We have a traditional question on the podcast. If we were to give you a magic wand for the next 5 minutes, and you could make one wish to change a mindset, a paradigm, a rule, a principle, a guideline, whatever you want, would the goal of improving our current situation as it pertains to housing, affordability, and overall market conditions for people, what would that be?
I think the fundamental challenge is uncertainty, and in uncertainty, instability in the buyer's mindset. And that comes from many different reasons. That comes from politics in Canada, politics down south, world geopolitics. It comes from, am I going to have a job tomorrow? And uncertainty around, how you're doing yourself in your own life. Uncertainty around, interest rates and where they're going, and are they going to shift so great that it's going to, stop me from being able to afford my home. I think if I could wave a wand and it could just happen, buyer uncertainty would get curbed. We would have a little bit more consistency on what to expect in some of those specific areas that are big macro issues that just lead to people not wanting to be engaged or wanting to buy or wanting to even rent or transition because of all that uncertainty. If we can fix some of that uncertainty and it can kind of calm itself down, I think the market will quickly rebound and come back. And I know that's not something that can very easily be done, but with time, I believe that will start to happen and we'll start to see that again.
Amen. And that's why we have the magic wand. We don't have regular one. It's a magic wand. Thank you, Jake. This has been great. Do you have any parting thoughts before we wrap this up?
I really enjoyed my time with you. Thank you very much. They were great questions.
Thank you for being here, and hopefully we get to do round 2 of this in the near future. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.